Aha! That's the one. This is the shittiest Airbnb where I ever stayed. There's like this tiny apartment. They've divided it into 4 bedrooms, each of them with a bunk bed. There must have been 8, 10 people in there, all sharing a single bathroom. Wow, I was traveling on a budget. There was a time when Airbnb was this beloved startup. You can save money when traveling, you can make money from your spare bedroom, you can meet new people. I counted like 50 Airbnb bookings. That's 50 different places that I've stayed, mostly in my 20s when I was broke and traveling on a budget. But at that time, like, hotels were these evil corporations, and Airbnb was Robin Hood and is going to eat them alive. Not only that, but the story of the founders is iconic. From renting out their own air mattress in their own apartment, to selling cereal to fund the early days of the company, to being one of the first Y Combinator unicorns. So what happened?
Horrifying rental disaster.
New York is going to begin enforcing a new law that regulates Airbnb
what
rentals.
What you need to know before opening your home to strangers.
Short-term vacation rental market is oversaturated.
By every measure, Airbnb accomplished what it set out to build. It disrupted the market. They went public, healthy finances, an okay stock performance. Investors must be happy, but we kind of hate the brand now.
After renting it out for the weekend, they were shocked at what they saw.
There's a camera in the light bulb.
Worst thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Airbnb is more expensive than a hotel.
Today, I want to explore this contradiction, this success paradox, because Airbnb is not the only platform that went from a people's favorite to a hated and controversial company, and usually dragging the founders with it. And then for us startup founders, is it just a matter of time or success before we become the villain? I remember when pitching a startup as using some form of artificial intelligence was interesting to investors. Like, that was a game changer, but not anymore. For good or worse, AI has been democratized to the point where every platform is expected to use some form of AI. I think we're on a path of making AI the backbone of all productivity platforms, just like AWS became the backbone of the web a few years ago. But even if you're not starting a business, learning to use AI as a tool for your job makes you precisely irreplaceable by AI. I recently took a ChatGPT and AI workshop that was really eye-opening, and the team who built it has agreed to give you guys a free pass. So the first 1,000 people who use the link in the description will get free access to this course on Growth School. More than 800,000 people have taken the course to advance their careers, from working professionals to founders to freelancers. Again, there's a link in the description, free for the first 1,000 people who grab a seat. Thanks to the Growth School team for sponsoring today's video. I remember when my landlady put up that sign. I live in Costa Rica. This Brooklyn apartment is only a part-time home to me. But do not let that woman catch you lending this place to anybody else. New York has had this love and hate relationship with Airbnb over the years. In the early days, it was this affordable alternative to completely crazy hotel prices in the city. I mean, at least it was for me. I remember this place I stayed once around Williamsburg. The owner was out on a trip and she had rented out her bedroom. I remember meeting her roommates and chatting with them in the living room. And back then, this was really Airbnb nirvana. She made money to cover her trip. I saved money. I met some new people. And this is Airbnb's original idea. This is Airbnb's original pitch deck. One of the first pitch deck templates we ever had at Slidebean. And that experience just perfectly matches Airbnb's problem and solution slides. Now, just to get on the same page, you know what's going to happen. We're going to do a timeline. Just a quick timeline on Airbnb's history and how it become such a hated platform. That pitch deck I just showed you is the one that they used at Y Combinator Demo Day. That's in 2009. But the company had actually started 2 years earlier, when the founders tried to attend this conference and found how crazy expensive hotels got around the event. They launched airbedandbreakfast.com, not the greatest domain name, around August 2008, and this is around the time when they came up with that pretty famous cereal stunt. After Y Combinator, with some funding under their belts, it took them just 18 months to reach 1 million nights booked, and then another 18 months to get to 10 million nights booked. By 2014, they became a unicorn. They changed their logo, which got them some laughs.
Your new logo looks like balls. Your new logo looks like a pair of balls.
And then by September 2014, San Francisco passed a law officially legalizing Airbnb. But then just a year later, people mobilized to move in the opposite direction. San Francisco has a massive housing problem. We actually flew there last year for our Tech Nomad series, and Airbnb was obviously making things worse. And then public outcry happened here in New York City as well, But that didn't really stop Airbnb from launching experiences, their tour guiding feature. They had some plans to launch an airline, but that didn't work out, and they finally filed to go public in November of 2020. This chart by the City of New York shows what percentage of the cost of rent was driven or caused directly by Airbnb. This Brooklyn neighborhood is called Bed-Stuy. Before the ban, according to Gothamist, this 4x6 block area had the highest concentration of Airbnb listings in the entire city. Around 100 listings just in these 2 or 3 blocks. Now, these investors were operating these units at best as hotel rooms and at worst as shitty hostels like the one I showed you earlier. And that's all gone now, as the city pretty much banned short-term stays. But that's just New York. The reality is that Airbnb is a great business. It's a great business for the hosts. It's a great business for the investors. Airbnb launched in the midst of the 2008 recession. I'm sure it helped some people afford their mortgages back then. And well, it honestly helped mint new millionaires, real estate investors that funded multiple properties that they owned through Airbnb.
Can you launch an Airbnb business with $0 and without having to rent or own a single property?
I own a bunch of Airbnbs. We'd make a couple 6 figures off of that.
This is how Airbnb changed my life.
But when do we stop seeing a company as disruptive? When do those risky actions that startups take go from innovative to irresponsible or unethical? Is it a pricing thing? Is it a branding thing? Is it the founder? Are all successful companies doomed to end up like this, hated by the public?
It's better to have 100 people love you than 1 million people that just sort of like you.
One theory that I looked into was the Icarus Paradox, coined by economist Danny Miller. That's inspired, of course, by the story of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. And in his case, the wings that allowed him to escape also became the cause of his demise. In business, this analogy could allude to this overconfidence or complacency that a company can fall into. And that's, of course, the story of BlackBerry. They had complete control over the smartphone market and simply became complacent and stopped innovating. Maybe a lesson for Apple to take in as well. But that isn't Airbnb's case. So does it relate to the success of the founder? To me, the typical example here is Mark Zuckerberg. Granted, he's not charismatic, but he's probably not a lizard. In the early days of Facebook, we did fall in love with his platform, and we did admire his success at creating it. Some would even go and venture to support him in screwing the Winklevi. We saw that in our own comment section. But at some point in Facebook's success story, the world fell out of love with Mark.
I've never really liked Mark Zuckerberg either.
Why does the media really hate Mark Zuckerberg so much?
Mark Zuckerberg, whenever he's in interviews, he always seems
Here's
off.
your fucking hero, Z, looking like a fucking stooge.
Who bought all the shares? I don't know, but he lost control at that point.
Even with all of its mistakes, Facebook or Meta continues to be a very profitable, well-valued company that performs great in the stock market. An oversimplistic logic to apply to this idea of tall poppy syndrome, criticizing successful people just because they rise above the rest. But there is much deeper and serious logic behind this, and it's not just tied to Mark, but to billionaires in general. And that has to do with inequality.
Almost all of the wealth and much of the income is going to the top 1%.
This is true, though. The top 1% of income earners have amassed almost 20% of the wealth in the US. And this feeling that life is rigged against the middle class is not only prevalent, but founded in real data. This idea that billionaires are getting away with not paying taxes, while people on the other end of the chart go bankrupt from a hospital bill. It's unfair, and we could talk about that for hours. Do remember, dear American viewers, that this didn't used to be like that for you. Rich people used to be taxed a lot more. Even if people like Mark Zuckerberg are self-made billionaires, they do have more money than they can ever spend in a lifetime. And I genuinely wonder how much of that amount of money is the cause of the backlash that they receive. And these aren't necessarily Nippo kids. Like, this isn't Roman Roy.
Feisty. Oh, family style. Well, almost like we're a family.
Mark's family was upper class. They weren't disgusting millionaires. His billionaire status is self-made as an internet entrepreneur, like many of you watching want to become. So is there a net worth bracket that makes people start hating on you? Even as an entrepreneur myself, I do wonder if I'll ever cross that bracket and people will start hating me because what I set out to build succeeded. Look at, say, for example, Bill Gates. From this dorky nerd dancing to now conspiracy theories around vaccines, or Jeff Bezos from this admired.com nerdy innovator to a space cowboy douchebag. I mean, Amazon does treat their warehouse workers like shit. It's a controversial company, but we do like Prime delivery. And is it Bezos' fault?
Yeah, first office of Amazon.com.
Is it our fault? Is it capitalism's fault? Lack of regulation? Is it the fault of the warehouse manager?
We'll get somebody to clean that up.
We're the ones that gotta clean that up.
We could make a whole video series about finding the cause of that. We have actually touched on it a couple times before, but the point for today is that it's Bezos who we get to point a finger at. And so did Jeff change from his 90s self, or is it our perception of him? And again, how much of that is because of the fact that he is now a billionaire? Curiously though, Airbnb doesn't suffer from this that much, but not for lack of trying. In the early COVID days, Airbnb had to halt their IPO and go through a serious round of layoffs, not to mention thousands of bookings canceled. And then Airbnb's policy, I think it was friendly, more than reasonable. Decent severance checks for all the employees that they laid out. They removed the 1-year cliff on stock options, so a lot of those were able to vest. They even built a whole website to help people get relocated. Disgruntled employees or hosts complained, and they made TikToks about it. But still, Brian Chesky, for the most part, is still a respected and admired founder by his peers. So could we even argue that he's a great CEO? But you're still going to find articles like this. What to down Airbnb? Airbnb's not down, it's thriving. Bookings are already ahead of pre-pandemic highs. They're making more revenue than ever. More crucially, this is what Airbnb set out to do from the very beginning, disrupt hotels. It seems to have done it so well, the business of hosting Airbnb seems to be so good that it actually transformed the market dynamics to the point where landlords considered it a viable alternative to have an Airbnb than to host a regular tenant. Tourists are willing to pay those prices, and so Airbnb is so good of a business to host that it did exactly that. It disrupted the market.
Finding a place to stay can be challenging.
I thought of hotel, but I'm like, I got 7 dudes with me.
You might call it a house guest nightmare.
And so should we let the market be? Should we let disruptors disrupt? Or should that progress be stopped and regulated? That is a much deeper question than I can answer in a 10-minute video, but we kind of explore that a little bit of that in many of the documentaries that we've made recently.
We need to go to hell or Canada.
And that's not the reason why we made this one. Our concern is founders and entrepreneurs. And let's go back to that original question. Does massive success equal being the villain? It seems so. And you're welcome to hate on billionaires or successful entrepreneurs, but at least understand the reasons why you're projecting that into them. Or maybe I should say, into us? Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. We launched a newsletter and a new channel this month called Startup Club, which I would really appreciate if you guys checked out. It's back to our basics when we started YouTube on making videos to help founders figure out the stuff around navigating a startup. And if you enjoyed this video, you should watch our episode on Adam Newman, who's still a billionaire, but completely undefendable and still manages to somehow lure investors into investing in his startups. Let's call them startups. See you guys next week.